know and we've heard how challenging self-driving will be and is in its development phase now. And using artificial intelligence, which is really the key to accomplishing this, is where we're leading a lot of automakers and tier ones.
Okay. Jim?
I'm Jim Sayer. I'm a research scientist at the University of Michigan and deployment director at the Mobility Transformation Center at the U. I designed and oversaw the construction of M-City. So essentially what we're trying to do is help OEMs and tier one suppliers develop their technologies. We're actually going further. We're looking at the social and the behavioral aspects associated with connected, shared, and automated driving.
Between CES and the Automotive News World Congress, a lot has been said about CASE, mobility, and the evolution. What hasn't been said? What do we have to, how do we fill in the gaps that this audience needs to know? What hasn't been mentioned yet? Let's start with you, Danny.
Right, I think, driving is hard, right? We all started out driving when we were 16 or whenever we got our first licenses, and you slowly start to learn how to drive. Now, to get to this next level of autonomous driving requires a computer to understand what we have learned over years and years. And so we've seen little bits of this coming out to market in driver assistance. We have other companies, Continental and others, that are doing great work in fully autonomous driving, but it's an extremely hard problem to solve. And so
are we overestimating how quickly it's going to occur?
I don't think so. I think, again, there's so many different factors coming in, and I'm sure we're going to get to the whole regulatory side at some point. But from a technology side, that there's a lot of known problems, but there's still a lot of experience that needs to be brought into those systems. I think that's really why we've seen this whole push away from engineers having to write code to do everything, to again moving toward a whole new realm of being able to train the cars to perform better than humans possibly
can.
We'll
come back to machine learning and artificial intelligence.
I think for us, the big thing is that it is going to be a step-by-step approach. And for some that say, I'm not ready for autonomous driving, quite frankly, at Continental, we're not ready either for fully autonomous driving.
I've been in some of your vehicles.
We call that automated driving.
Yeah, right.
Because what we're saying is in 2016, you'll have partially, in 2020, you'll have higher, and then in 2025, we'll have fully automated. And even then, we don't call it autonomous. And I think what we lose sometimes is all the steps that have been taking place for more than 20 years already, all the way going through 2025 or 2030, when really autonomous driving vehicle will be there. So we got to keep in mind, it's not from 0 to 100.
I think one of the things that doesn't get enough attention are the societal issues. We have a hard enough time in the industry keeping track of the changes that are taking place. The general public has a perception, rightly or wrongly, that full autonomy is right around the corner. Dealing with their appropriate understanding of what the system's capabilities are, as well as the ability for legislation to keep up with those changes, those I think are really things that need more attention than they could.
There's this whole suits versus geeks competition, overblown, Silicon Valley with a different business model coming in, and the auto industry with its old incremental approach just lunging along.
I don't think it's talked about enough. I think there is a difference between the traditional
What's
business
the difference?
models. Speed, look at Tesla and some of the speed,
okay.
Mindset, and it's not intelligence, it's just a different way of thinking and the different business models that come out of it. The infrastructure that we have in the automotive industry traditionally and the mindset is different from what you're finding in Silicon Valley. We're tapping into it. We formed our new intelligent transportation business unit, sits in Silicon Valley to tap into that. So I think there is a difference, and it's not that one is right or wrong. I think they both have to come together.
Danny, you can take off your tie and tell us about Silicon Valley.
So my home is Silicon Valley. I mean, I'm the geek now in the suit, right? Although I wear the suit in Detroit, I don't wear the suit in Silicon Valley. But I think the really amazing thing, as you mentioned, you guys are now our neighbor. So many tier ones are our neighbors. Virtually every automaker has a lab, from a small hub to multi-hundred person. And it's great because we're heavily engaged with them. And once we engage with them, there's really an incredible dynamic. I mean, our engineers are on site whether it's in their hubs in Silicon Valley or here in Detroit or in Ingolstadt or in Tokyo. And we have their teams on site in our labs. They come to work with NVIDIA badges now. And so it's not a traditional supplier relationship that we have. We're not a chip maker that sells something, we get the money and it's done. It's true integration, it's collaboration, it's development. And the cool thing now is, I mean, software is such a huge part of this. So we're creating a whole platform for our customers to develop on and really create some really amazing new things. And then even once the car ships, though, it's not over, right? We continue to develop software. What Tesla's done, one of our customers has done with over-the-air updates is really setting the tone.
Is there any resolution in this, maybe not a conflict, but a different business approach, in the fact that in the software industry, one prototype is worth 1,000 pages of PowerPoints. And now we're getting to the point we're starting to talk about prototype vehicles that are automated, autonomous, potentially driving around U of M. At that point, don't the teams have to come together and collaborate in a way that is fairly traditional, even if it's faster?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really the key. What we're seeing, though, is talking about your pace of innovation, not your pace awards.
Good. Well, NVIDIA did win a pace award, and Continental has won several. So,
yeah. But I think the key thing is, in addition to all the traditional automakers, there's a massive number of other companies, whether they're software companies. We've talked a lot about it today. We had CraftJack here yesterday. But there's also a lot of startup companies that are viewing themselves in the transportation business, not so much in the car business. But I think that's something that Detroit and other automotive places really need to pay attention to. You can't ignore that, because
you're starting to hear that come out, that we're in the mobility transportation business.
And there's a lot of money come from Sandhill, other VCs that are going into these transportation companies that are going to be very nimble and are going to do things at a much different pace than the traditional companies have been able to.
Is it fair to say both Silicon Valley and Detroit need each other now, because everything that's going to be smart is software related? I mean, Mark Royce has said that GM is a little bit facing this issue like Apollo 13. They have to figure out how, coming back with some issues, they can be resourceful enough to be successful.
I don't know if we need Silicon Valley just for the software, but it's a mindset as well that happens. And we've got 12,000 software engineers. That's half of our engineering talent in total at Continental. We need more. We just bought Electrobit, which is one of the greatest software houses out there. That's 1,900 software engineers. We didn't get that in Silicon Valley. But what it is, it's bringing Silicon Valley mindset and speed. And yes, I think we do need each other.
I think they're complementary.
Complementary.
Yeah.
Can we play, I mean, where we look for collaborative communities, they not only have to have collaboration processes that align, but they have to have the same goal. I mean, if you're trying to redefine the auto industry as a service industry and not a product industry, is that the same goal?
I mean, it's still the same goal in terms of what the Silicon Valley is providing to the vehicle manufacturers. I mean, they're trying to serve a purpose to meet their customers' needs.
From the CES last week, a couple of quotes. Detroit's trying to bolt on fixes to old processes. They use closed system versus open ones. That's just going to hold them back on all the cybersecurity areas, because they're going to end up defending a small, low-walled fort. Detroit is still selling the drill with the 60-pound torque instead of selling the hole. And the other one was, it took OnStar 20 years as a service to morph into something, and Detroit's still charging for cruise control as an option.
Yeah,
that's a little preachy to me, but it's also fair criticism, isn't it?
I think there's an element of criticism. Yes, OnStar started early, and OnStar took a few years to catch up, but there's also technology and mindset, and the value of that connection was not really seen until most recently. The value of the connection to the cloud is something that OnStar has had for a while, but now when you connect that because of the sophistication of software and the other tools in the vehicle, you can achieve better fuel economy. We demonstrated one out in CES where we connected a vehicle to what we call Dynamic E-Horizon, used a connection like an OnStar connection, brought it into the vehicle and improved fuel economy, just knowing the traffic light signals, timing, by 4%. You know, we can now look around curves. So the value of OnStar has been there, but it wasn't until other systems caught up and really the connection was established before you could really see it. And now that is accelerating.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's a fair statement to say, you know, they're nickel and diming the automotive industry, the consumer. It's the same thing in consumer electronics. The more memory I want, the
if
more I pay.
Google's going to save the world and the auto industry is just out for profit, is there a culture clash that can ever be resolved?
The consumer electronic industry isn't out just to save the world. They're still in it for a profit. They're some of the most profitable companies out there.
Highest margin?
Yeah, highest margins. So you're paying something extra for that added convenience or that added feature in consumer electronics. It's no different.
You know, what I think is going to be interesting is then people are going to have their cars, and much like Tesla showed us, if you wanted the autopilot feature, it's a software update, but you have to pay $2,500 for that software update. And so again, I think there's going to be features, capabilities that will come in the form of software, much like you were saying you have to pay for a hardware-based system, and that's just kind of the future of the car.
Bill Gates always says we always overestimate the impact of technology in the short term, but we always underestimate the impact, the cumulative impact of technology in the long term or intermediate term. What are we overestimating right now in terms of its impact?
Well, I think, like Jeff was saying, the speed of mass adoption, there's a lot in the media, but it's going to take a long time. But
it's consumer behavior.
Well, just
technology.
There's the technology is more or less there now. It still is being refined, but we've already seen deployments in specific places. You have closed systems where automated vehicles are working. I mean, they've been rampant in farming and mining, right? And so, but we're working on programs where there's already deployments in Europe on fixed routes for autonomous shuttles on public roads. We're working with Volvo. Next year, there will be customers who can lease Volvo XC90s with our technology inside, fully autonomous on roads around Gothenburg, Sweden. So it's going to be these test things. I mean, arguably, Google's already doing it in Mountain View. But again, to get to any kind of mass adoption is going to be much longer than I think the media seems to be reporting it today.
So we're getting all this connectivity, but it's still going to have to accumulate. Over how many years?
Well, you know, if you look at the number of cars that are connected, you know, there's a number of them today, but by 2020, there's going to be 250 million vehicles connected and 54 billion devices connected to the internet.
That's the Internet of Things.
Exactly. So when the vehicle truly becomes part of the Internet of Things, which it is becoming more and more every day, that's where the connection to all the resources and all the information that we really need becomes available in the car to do really autonomous driving. Because with just sensors on the vehicle, there's a limit to what you can see and what you can anticipate and what the vehicle needs to really operate around that blind corner or 2 miles ahead. And that's where all that connection has to happen.
And that integration will be done by the OEMs, or is it going to be a continuous process with their whole community of suppliers?
I think it's absolutely suppliers, it's government, it's infrastructure. It's got to be the entire ecosystem, what we call holistic connectivity. In the entire ecosystem, everybody has to contribute.
A lot of cooks in the kitchen.
There is. And it ultimately, I think the OEM on their vehicles will control it, no doubt.
I think I agree with you in terms of this utopia. It would be great if every car talked to each other, if every street light talked to every car. But that is so far out. I mean, that's what's going to delay this thing to 2030, 2050, or later.
Is that because of infrastructure and investment?
That's a big part of it. The fleet that's out there, right? If you are dependent upon that level of connectivity, it's going to be really impede things. And so again, I think that's where we see all the automakers and all the new entrants still saying, we need to move forward. We need to make sure our car can sense and can operate safely without relying on that external simultaneous input. And so the sensor fusion, bringing in the cameras and the radar and the LiDAR and everything is great. Bringing the map, I think we've seen in the last year plus. We all have kind of known how important the map is, but now the world sort of understands how critical the mapping is with everything with here and others. But getting that communication data is just another layer, which is tremendous. But again, my concern is that we can't wait for that data.
But there are a lot of media that write like, because every car has GPS, we almost are there to autonomous or driverless vehicles, and we know GPS is inaccurate enough.
Right.
And it's only plus or minus 3 meters, and I think that's 9 feet on either side, and so if you're a pedestrian, you better watch out. But it seems to me that there is this compression going on, like we're almost there, and the technology isn't quite there.
From a mapping perspective, we're not even close, because you need to know lane position, and you need to know the road furniture, if you will, the signs and the sign recognition. And so from a mapping, we got a long way to go. And that's why the sensors on the vehicle are important, and that's why the connection to the cloud is important.
I think there's enough development still required in a number of areas. It is one of the major reasons why it's going to be
So a
step
realistic
approach.
point of view about where we are on this roadmap to this mobility future is probably something that we should expect to start seeing. Let's not get caught up in the hoorah from...
So what I was really intrigued by, and we share this view, with Google and John Krafchuk, is that the systems, we're able to basically monitor the system. So these cars are out there collecting data, right? And they're doing however many tens of thousands of miles a day. They're simulating 1 million plus miles a day. And all of this is data then that can feed in to really teach this brain of the car. And so from a regulatory standpoint, I think what's going to be really interesting is to have this data that we can show how safe these vehicles are. That even if they weren't driving autonomously, they were operating in a shadow mode where they were pretending they were driving and the human driver was there. And so they'll be able to show how safe, how precise they are, and in many cases, had they been controlling a vehicle, they would have prevented an accident. And so once we're able to show that to the world, to the consumers, to regulators, I think that will really solve a lot of these uncertain issues.
It came out after John spoke yesterday, but Google's had to admit that there are about 272 times in those 1 million miles where they had to take control of the vehicle to prevent it from doing something wrong. And there were 69 times where they had to seize it from the computer because it's a learning process.
That's right.
Okay, plus or minuses. There's a lot of data that we're going to be spewing out of these vehicles that consumers may or may opt in. That's just one of the areas for consumer behavior. Do we accelerate, or is it slowing things down at this point? Let's say consumer privacy concerns. Is that a plus in the migration to this future of connected vehicles that are almost autonomous?
I think it's a net neutral.
Net neutral, okay.
Yeah.
What do you think, Danny?
Yeah, I think people are concerned about privacy, based on that word, but we all give up so much information carrying these phones around in our pockets, and Google and Apple know where we are and what we're surfing and everything like that. So when you really drill down in the car, people are going to be getting benefits and services. Your car company already knows where your car is, whether you realize it or not. So I don't think people are going to be too concerned about it. The data going back is really anonymous data. It's like Waze, right? It's probes out there getting traffic information. And so you're more than happy to sort of give up your location because you get a benefit of, oh my God, there's traffic here, I'm going to go that way. So I think people really, in the long run, aren't going to be very concerned about it.
I would agree. Google is free because they get a benefit, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of it is not just, does a consumer give up access? It's who owns that data and who owns the information into and out of the vehicle and who takes advantage of that with new business models. I think that's the bigger question.
But the sense is that consumers will opt in for the benefit of the services they're going to get.
Absolutely.
What about security, hacking issues?
Hacking is there today. Hacking is obviously a concern not just in automotive, but in every industry. And I think it's a big concern, but it's not new for the industry. There's a lot of cybersecurity work, even for body control modules and engine control modules and brake control modules we make today. Cybersecurity is a huge discussion, and every company has centers of expertise talking about cybersecurity.
The Jeep hack And even the Volkswagen issue with diesels indicates that software is doing some things that we may or may not know about, right? It's waking people up to the fact.
Absolutely. And again, I get to get another plug for artificial intelligence in here. What we're doing is, again, creating systems where the car can be aware of what's going on if it's designed as such. So there's all this bus traffic going around, and the problem has been there's all these open holes, the Bluetooth connection, the Wi-Fi connection, the tire pressure monitoring system connections, all these things. If nobody inside the car, no system inside the car is paying attention, then of course it makes it very easy to hack. But if the car electronics are designed to be watching what's going on, we can have a system that can be trained to understand what's normal and what's not. And so when the tire pressure monitor system is trying to update the vehicle, we can say, hey, that's anomalous behavior, and shut it down. And so I think it requires a wholesale change to the fundamental design of the computing systems inside the car, not just all these distributed components. And I think, again, that's where Silicon Valley, where startups or a new approach is required.
Okay.
Yeah, from a more general mobility perspective, the vehicle for security is not the weak link. It's the traffic control systems, the networks.
It's every way into the vehicle.
Well, no, even just controlling the signals themselves. I mean, as people have demonstrated, they can easily hack in and...
That's the broader infrastructure.
That's the broader infrastructure.
So is it plus or minus? I mean, we're going to resolve that?
And so you can have the completely secure vehicle, but there's still this weak link if you...
On our journey.
On our journey, exactly.
Okay, is a plus or minus?
That's a minus.
Okay, what about government regulations, state or federal? Plus or minus?
Short term, I would say minus when I start to see some of the stuff that comes out of California just before the holidays there. But I think long term, they will see the benefit, kind of to the point by Danny. You know, 3,000 people die on the world's roads every day. 140,000 people get injured. These technologies that we're talking about will enable a huge improvement. And when they start to see the data, I think you're going to see a reversal.
And I think you're right. It's, people are concerned, but soon these technologies will be mandated, right? We have seat belts now, airbags. The next thing are these emergency braking systems, lane keeping, and Elon Musk's prediction is maybe you won't be able to drive anymore in the future. Now, I think that's a long, long ways away, but I think what's going to happen is people are going to opt not to drive in a lot of situations. I mean, the traffic, freeway stuff that's out there and everything else, would be great to just turn over control of your car. So,
is there a big education process underway, whether Continental or NVIDIA or U of M, to get legislators to see where we are technologically and where we can be so that we don't get into artificial barriers?
I can't speak to other states, but within the state of Michigan, yes. And I think the state is very active in trying to create an environment that is supportive of the industry, as opposed to slowing it down.
Well, that's a
inhibiting
hometown play.
I think coming out to Silicon Valley, we've had Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker came out and wanted to meet with us. Secretary Fox at CES came by to meet with us. I think there's just a lot of great interest in what we're doing to make sure they fully understand and that barriers, that they're not erecting barriers, but they're being a partner to this technology. And of course, everyone wants to make sure we're moving forward and it's safe and it's reliable.
So is it fair to say short-term minus, long-term plus for regulation?
Sure.
We hope. We hope. What about the investment needed for all this? Where's Wall Street on this? Where are the returns for this new technology that's going to save lives and solve greenhouse gases?
Well, again, so our office is really close to Sand Hill Road, home of venture capital, and there's a lot of investment going on in automotive. And we've seen, too, automakers having their own venture funds, right? There's a lot of great interest in the technologies.
And it's always interesting.
Hardware and software, right? Both, apps and the ecosystem, and even some automakers buying software companies and tier ones as well. So I think it's very active right now. I think it's really positive. It's, the Valley is really an exciting place to be from an automotive perspective.
So investment's not an issue. We've got plenty of liquidity in the...
It's almost too much right now.
GM just put $500 million in Lyft.
Yeah,
so obviously they see a future in whether it's sharing, whether it's the Bolt going into such a fleet, which who knows if that's the motivation, but clearly there's investment available because there's lives to be saved.
And Google put in, what, 250 plus another tranche into Uber,
Yeah.
thus making a goober.
That'll be
I've
the
waited for
headline.
that.
I know, I figured
I wanted
That'll
that.
be the headline.
What about consumer acceptance of this whole concept of shared living? Is that going to accelerate, a plus or a minus in terms of our move to autonomy or driverless vehicles?
Well, car sharing is there today to a certain extent. There's about 5 million users today. There was less than 500,000 back in 2005. There's going to be 25 million users by 2020. So car sharing is going up. We certainly are helping with our technologies at Continental to enable that with car access. But I think the real drivers are going to be the urbanization. You know, back in 1950, 30% of the people lived in urban environments. By 2050, it's 70%. Urbanization is going to drive a need for car sharing, whether it's in Beijing or London and the congestion. It's going to happen. And we can debate all day long how fast, what the impact is to volume in the industry. That's a whole different discussion, but I think it's going to happen.
I think, yeah, we're probably going to see a reduction in the number of vehicles, right, and that's no surprise, but increase in the number of vehicle miles. And, you know, we could see scenarios, right, where you're able to get you get a ride to work, and then your car goes off and takes, you know, your kids to school or whatever it is, right? And so there's going to be a lot of cars without people in them moving from place to place.
Is it too stark to think about the studies that are out there that say with autonomy and vehicle sharing, there'll be 40% reduction in new vehicle sales?
I think that's a long-term
meaning more than 2025?
Yeah.
Yeah, we live our lives by the clock. And the reason we have traffic jams is because a lot of people want to be mobile at the same time of day. And unless something drastic changes relative to that, you're still going to have peak demand periods where you're going to either have to satisfy that or people's lifestyles will have to change.
Well, I've heard you talk, Jim, about the pod-like vehicles getting people to some larger vehicles that will platoon people in conga line style into work to a central station.
But that's more of a mass transit model than it is a shared vehicle.
I mean, 93% of the time vehicles sit, whether it's in your garage at your home or your garage at work, 93% of the time. So there's certainly opportunities for sharing and for better utilization. Now, some of those are second, third, and fourth cars that are sitting 98% or 99% of the time. But there's opportunity there.
I've heard anecdotally mothers say that they would share their vehicle anytime they want, but once they put a baby seat in, they won't. I mean, that there are behavior issues that have yet to be addressed on the migration to share.
What I love, though, is you have these ride-sharing services now that are targeted specifically for children, right? And so there's this safety concern that is just natural as a parent, but I think you wouldn't necessarily put them in whatever random Uber showed up, but if you're part of this network that has been certified and it's driven by other mothers and there's car seats and it's more regulated, that people already are doing it. It's deployed in the Bay Area.
What about the liability issues? How about, who's going to insure the vehicle?
It's no different
that's
than being in
either-
a taxi, though, right?
Well, what if it's a driverless pod?
Oh, I see, if driverless.
Now, who's insuring that? Or me as a rider?
So what I think is interesting, Volvo, our partners, come out and said that they will assume full liability for anything that happens in their autonomous vehicle when it's being driven in autonomous mode. And I think that's kind of set the standard. I think other automakers are going to have to follow suit.
So the OEM will insure the vehicle.
Absolutely.
I mean, historically, the driver, and even today, legally, in most cases, you know, maybe the Volvo situation will test this, but the driver has always been the one that's liable for what happens in the vehicle, right? And so it's going to be tested. I don't have an answer for what's going to happen from a legal.
But there is a liability
Absolutely.
iceberg out there that has to be addressed or missed.
It's the transition period through the lower levels of automation until you get to full autonomous, where the driver's going to have to carry a policy and the vehicle is going to have that possibility. That's really the challenging time.
Now, in a transition to full mobility where the value is a service, not a product, right? I'm buying mobility. The there's a piece of the current business model called the retailer, the franchise dealer. What's their role in that evolved state of mobility as a service?
There's still going to be a need for personal vehicles. Not everyone is going to live in an urban center or along, a trunk line where they can utilize mass transit. The need for personal vehicles is never going to go away, I'm convinced. It may be reduced. So there still will be a need for dealerships, if for no other reason, to sell those individual vehicles, but also to maintain all the vehicles that are out there being shared.
Well,
if you look at like Audi and Silver Car, or there's Car2Go, and there's other manufacturers that are really behind some of these specific car sharing programs. Again, I think that, to your point, that the dealership and the retail side is still going to play a role with that, supporting those vehicles.
the business model, according to CES discussion I had, was Detroit is always designed, built, shipped, and forgotten the product. And what Silicon Valley sees the evolved model being design, build, ship, update, and retain a relationship over the lifetime of that vehicle, even with more miles, maybe even more maintenance.
I think that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you're absolutely right. The relationship with the vehicle, with the customer, goes on forever at this point.
When that connection to the car is there, and Tesla uses it every day, that will maintain that customer loyalty, the engagement, and the possibility to continue to evolve that vehicle over time. It's not going to be build it, ship it, and service it. It's going to be, Tesla doesn't have model years like the traditional industry. Every day is a new model year for them because they're constantly updating, constantly offering new services and products given the same hardware in the vehicle.
And it's a two-way communication link, right? There's information that comes out of those cars that is shared that makes that fleet smarter, right? They can continue to put information in the cloud. And again, as we move forward on this path to autonomy, the learnings from these vehicles, whether it's collecting map data, whether it's learning behaviors, I mean, we can train the car to understand the fact that if there's a stuck lane of traffic on the freeway and this lane's moving, this car is going to expect other cars to jump out in front, just like we all are watching for that, because that's human behavior. By driving these cars out there, they can collect that information, essentially teach themselves that that's what's going to happen on the roads. And so that's how we really progress to this autonomy, by learning through that experience.
You've clearly taken a position that the computer with cameras, with LiDAR or a composite of all the sensing devices becomes a completely cognitive entity.
It's cognitive in the sense that it's collecting information, and then its learning takes place in the cloud. It's supervised, it's tested before it gets deployed back in the car. So it's not this real-time loop where this car is going to say, oh, I figured it all out and I'm going to go do something. But it's still part of a process that requires testing, certification before it goes back into the car.
But the artificial intelligence part of that is the updating of the cloud, in the cloud.
That's right.
Of all the shapes and sizes and events that you'll see.
Absolutely. And so it's not, the cool thing, I think, is that it's not just about using artificial intelligence to understand, oh, that's a pedestrian, or that's a bike, or that's a police car, but to then the next level of research. And this is really what Google has had as a problem, is the car drives too much like a computer. And so we need to have these cars drive like a human, a good human driver, not the average necessarily, but it's understanding the behavior, being able to anticipate. So we're tracking all these other cars. The computer can do that infinitely better than a human can, but then be able to anticipate what everything else in the scene that's moving is going to do next.
And those billions of transactions that the calculations being made, that's why you have a water-cooled chip.
That's right. Yeah, we just introduced our new product. It's basically the power of 150 MacBook Pros. That's this size of a tablet, and it's a supercomputer, right? It's a massive supercomputer, and it can't be water cooled.
Another fluid situation to be resolved inside the vehicle.
Well,
right?
you already have water
pun
cooling, so
I know.
I think that one of the things that they really announced is more of a convergence in controllers. There's more than 90 controllers on a vehicle, and the concept of domain controller and maybe even a central one controller there's going to be some change in the number of controllers,
and-
which will help with cybersecurity, but certainly everybody's moving to some form of domain controllers because you need to have that quick speed in connection.
I think from an industry perspective, what will be interesting to see how it plays out is clearly the manufacturers need to differentiate themselves in their product, but as we learn more safety critical things that all vehicles could be improved by, how is that information going to be shared? You know, the really super challenging events that no one anticipated, how is that conveyed throughout the industry in order to produce a safer product throughout?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see that sharing of information. It'll be interesting to see whether individual automakers actually adopt that. I mean, what we're seeing today is each automaker basically is able to train. They have their own algorithms, they have their own software teams, really smart people, and they're competing. It is a race to the autonomous car, and each automaker wants to achieve that. I think what potentially could happen is, again, through simulation, there might be some more standard databases that they're able to leverage, or maybe there's certain tests that regulatory agencies are putting in place, like your car has to be able to handle all these different things before it's allowed on the road. So
Well,
we might
there's
see some
clearly a role
standardization.
for somebody to intervene beyond the privacy or the core data to say we need some standards on V2V communications, for instance, and things like that. But this data, there's so much data going back and forth. It seems to me that it's fair game for taxing entities to say, we have a whole new structure here. You want to step in that lane, we're going to have an intermediary to figure out how to get paid for you being in that lane or passing that digital gate.
Those are some of the different business models that I mentioned before, the different business models on who owns the data into and out of the vehicle and how is it used. And I think those revenue streams and profits follow the money, right? Follow the money, follow the profit, and people will look to take advantage of that. The other thing is when it comes to sharing of information, and if everybody develops their own, and I'm not talking about map, I'm talking about really a road database, the furniture on the road, the lane position. If everyone does it on their own, there's a lot of waste. And so we think there's an opportunity for collaboration for what we call road database, where you have multiple OEMs with the sensors on those vehicles, all sharing that information about the road. Not what they're doing with the data, but the road data through their sensors on the vehicle, whether it's cameras or other sensors. Bring it all together in one location in a shared way. Each OEM that contributes gets the benefit back. You have a much better result, much faster, much cheaper. It's what you do with the data that's important, not how you get the data.
And I think the municipalities would benefit vastly, right? You have all these cars, regardless of brand, if they're hitting potholes, right? You have that information that you could be transmitting to deploy your maintenance vehicles to fix that. Or if there's black ice on the road, right? Even there's safety things. All these cars could be communicating.
You can transfer.
It's
Go ahead,
a
Jim.
great idea.
But even further than that, I mean, there are probably safety-related nuggets that are going to be learned that really need to be shared. Because the failure of one manufacturer is really not helpful to the entire industry. And so if you have a situation where you have a lot of press about one particular vehicle's failure, that's going to damage sales for everyone.
Well, you have a race going on, and there's some technological barriers. There's a lot of learning to be done. What do you see 2025 as the composition of the fleet of vehicles being, let's just say, sold? What does that look like to you?
If I had money to invest, but I'm a poor academic, so I don't, I'd invest in mass transit manufacturing. I think we're going to see with urbanization,
The urban effect is pretty strong.
Yeah, it's pretty strong. Obviously, we're still going to have shared personal vehicles, but I think getting into the manufacturing of these pods.
And tax incentives to penalize those of us who like to drive?
Well, I'm not suggesting that, but...
What do you see, Dan?
I see, I don't have a percentage, but I see widespread adoption of cars that can be driven as you would when you enjoy driving and could be fully autonomous, being able to punch in from A to B, no problem.
Yeah, I think more sharing for sure, is more electrification. And we haven't talked so much about electrification, but clearly
48 volt coming?
48 volt is coming, surprisingly, and maybe to some. It's being really driven in China. I mean, because of Beijing, because of other things. China's one of the leading countries for 48 volt.
But that's
So
going to power a lot of this system that we're talking about,
Absolutely.
too.
So 48 volt is coming for sure. By 2025, we think somewhere around 25% of vehicles will have some form of electrification. I'm not talking about start-stop. I'm talking about really some form of electrification. So I think that's going to be a big factor. When it comes to autonomous driving, it depends how you define it. Depends how you define what is autonomous. Is it full hands-off? 2025, I'm not ready to go there yet, right? But I think you'll see an increase just step by step by step every day.
I think there's many decades ahead where people are going to want to control the vehicles. Not all the time, but some of the time.
But we are moving in that quadrant for a transformation towards shared vehicles, fully electrified, automated or semi-automated or auto drive or pilot drive as terms go, but moving to self-driving at some point.
I mean, we have piloted driving today, and more vehicles later this year and next year that anyone can go out and buy for the freeway, right? And that's just really the first step. And I think, again, once people see the benefits of that, it will accelerate adoption.
Well, look, I think we filled in all of the gaps right before lunch. Is there anything else that hasn't been covered?
It looks like another question coming in here, but I don't know.
I've got one gap that we filled yesterday.
Okay.
What we saw in the industry is there's no central place where people can talk about these challenges and these opportunities associated with automated driving. And so what we've done is we launched yesterday a website called 2025 AD, 2025 Automated Driving, where it's a central database, a central portal, a central website to share information about the societal, the legal, and the technical aspects of automated driving. We hope OEMs, media, consumers, and all the stakeholders will contribute content and openly discuss it. And so we launched it yesterday, 2025ad.com. Go take a look. We need to have more dialogue in the industry.
Great initiative. And this dialogue has helped a lot, too. Two questions, both on privacy and that security element we just touched on briefly. We've said consumers will opt in because there's value to the services, right? But breaches are a safety issue. Are breaches going to be solved just as a societal issue, or is it an auto industry burden to figure out how to keep everybody out of the OBD?
I think it's a burden on the industry to do it. Society will not accept breaches in security. Just like you wouldn't in your private bank, you're not going to accept it in your car. So we have an obligation to make it safe, make it secure, and make it comfortable.
Yeah, I think concerns about privacy are one thing. It's the safety related or the economic impact of a breach. I think, again, people are willing to give up a lot of information for convenience up to a point. But obviously when their welfare or is at risk, that's when you draw the line.
Okay. Should I be thinking I should get a discount from the dealer if I opt into all of this connectivity?
You might find models like that. I wouldn't be surprised.
So there is a new business model out there about the value of the data at some point.
No question.
Okay. Anything else? We're going to head to lunch right downstairs. This has been a great panel, great discussion. There's still a lot to go on case and everything else, but I think we touched on all the high points. Thanks, Jeff, Danny, Jim. Thanks a lot. That was great.